Kia ora team, welcome to exercise physiology. I've got their part one, but I've actually combined all of exercise physiology into this one space. What we're going to look at over this topic is energy transformation and metabolism. So how energy is moved from one space to another within our body, and we're going to look at the basics of energy balance. So a lot of this exercise physiology is actually related to nutrition in terms of where we get energy from. So some of this will be a recap from human anatomy and physiology in semester one, but we're going to slow it down a bit and go into a bit more detail. So fundamental concept is that after we digest and absorb nutrients, we must then do something with them. Some of those things are use them for energy, use them to build the body's components, so our structure, but also to excrete what is left after digestion and absorption. We get energy from food, but the food contains what we call potential energy. Potential meaning there is energy available in food, stored in food, and it can be converted into what's called kinetic energy. And kinetic means moving energy, so energy that is moving. So potential energy within food, we can then transform that and change it into kinetic energy, which looks like moving energy, which is what we need. And that helps us to move and stay alive. The sun gives plants their energy, and then animals that eat plants or other animals can then make use of this energy, which is stored as various types of chemical bonds. So ultimately, the sun gives us energy via plants and other animals. And if you think about what you eat, fundamentally, that's what we eat, plants and other animals. When we break these bonds within food, so the chemical bonds, we're looking at chemistry. We don't touch on chemistry, but everything is made up of different elements bonded together. We can transfer this energy that is within the bonds of two molecules to regenerate ATP. And we know that ATP is the energy currency of the body, so it's the energy that we can spend. And eventually we use that ATP to do work such as move, but also to drive metabolism. And metabolism is the sum of all of the chemical reactions that happen within the body to keep us alive. So that's the breaking down, building up of different molecules to build us and to keep us functioning. The chemistry involved to transfer energy requires the breaking and reforming of bonds between molecules. So we're talking about super microscopic stuff here. This movement of energy is energy transfer, and the energy transfer is quite a key concept. The sum of all of these chemical reactions happening within the body to keep us alive is known as metabolism. And we often think of metabolism as how much food we burn or how much energy we burn, which is true because all of the chemical reactions that happen within the body are keeping us alive. Most of these reactions are turning food that we eat into energy that our body can use. So that's often why we think of metabolism as breaking down and using energy from food. Down the bottom, we've got an asterisk in blue, and that states that we cannot make energy. We cannot create energy. We can only transfer it to something else. So it's sort of a little bit of to do with some of the stuff we've looked at in biomechanics in terms of energy is transferred from one space to another. So we don't make energy within the body, we get it from food, the bonds in food that make up the structure of food, and we break that down and repackage it into something that the body is able to use. So let's look at ATP. We need ATP for nearly every action within the body. So it helps us move our skeletal muscles, which in turn moves our skeleton, allows us to move around. ATP helps us contract our digestive muscles, so that's smooth muscle tissue. ATP helps us produce enzymes, and enzymes are key chemical compounds that help break down and contribute to metabolism. And ATP helps carry molecules across cell membrane. So if we remember back to our first or second lecture in HAP, we looked at how substances move across a cell membrane when we had active and passive transport. Active required energy. even need it to form more ATP. So just to build up ATP, we actually need to use ATP. So it's a little bit like the saying, you need to spend money to make money. The cost of building ATP is less than what comes out at the end, depending on which system you use. So with all of these important jobs going on all the time, we need a constant supply of ATP. We can get ATP from the nutrients that we eat. So on a side note, macronutrients, which you've probably heard about, provide us with energy, whereas micronutrients don't provide us directly with energy, but give us the tools to help the body function and run correctly. So mostly looking at, we are only looking at macronutrients in this topic. So we can carry some nutrients in our bloodstream to use immediately. So remember, our cardiovascular system is our transport system. So we've got a pool of nutrients sitting in there ready to be used, but there's not enough to keep us going for very long. Which sort of makes sense, because if you want to store enough energy in our blood to last a long amount of time, it's going to take up a lot of space. So our body often needs to use stored nutrients to put somewhere else, somewhere where it takes a bit of time to get, but it's stored in a more efficient way. Most of the time, so this includes during short duration exercise, our energy comes from the nutrients that we have stored in our liver cells, in our muscle cells, and in our fat cells. So those are all slightly different storage spaces, but we can tap into those stored energy sites. The two most important raw materials for making ATP are carbohydrates and fats. So those two macronutrients. Protein is the other one. Alcohol is actually a macronutrient as well. But these two are the ones that help build ATP, and the two that the body likes to use. So carbohydrates we can store as a compound called glycogen, which is kept in both our muscle cells and our liver cells. So if you think about like storage space in your house, you've got various places you can store things. In our body, we can store carbohydrates or glucose in the form of glycogen in our muscles and in our liver. Fats, as a stored form, and also as the most common form of fat that we eat, are triglycerides. So you might remember that tri meaning three, so we've got three what we call fatty acids. That's what I think of as my fingers, and then this glycerol structure that holds those three fatty acids together. That's how a triglyceride is stored. Triglycerides are the stored form of fats, which are kept in both fat cells and in some smaller amounts within our muscle cells. So if you think about expensive beef that you might get at a restaurant, and they talk about having marbling through the meat, that is fat stored within a muscle cell. These types of fuels are stored in one form and then used in another. So the storage form is actually not directly usable. And these two forms may differ from the form in which we eat them and then the form in which we store them. So that's that whole metabolism process. We need to break down what a sandwich is to be able to then store it in its components that we need, use what we need at the time, and get rid of what we don't need. By the time many of the nutrients find their way to our cells, they no longer look like a sandwich or their original form. The structure of ATP, adenosine is a molecule found throughout the body. It's also involved in many physiological processes. ATP is an adenosine molecule with 3 phosphate molecules attached to it. And the adenosine is actually a sugar molecule, a 5-carbon sugar molecule with these 3 phosphates attached. So on the left, you've got adenosine, which is the green and the blue. That's sort of like chemically what the structure looks like. And then you've got these 3 purple phosphates. And then on the right, you've got those joined together. And you'll see the 3 P's have got these wiggly lines. That's to show that the bonds between those two are highly active. There's a lot of potential energy between those. And that's to do with like how the electron structure is set up around those phosphate molecules and the relationship in that bond. So the structure of it is set up where it's got high potential energy and is easily split to release that energy. These ATP molecules are glued together. So think of like just gluing something together with these bonds called covalent bonds. And in those bonds, you've got energy, which makes ATP a powerful biological battery. So biology is study of organisms, and then a battery, as you know. So this highly electric biological battery. We need ATP to power all of the work that happens within our cells. And how this works is we break one adenosine phosphate bond by the process of hydrolysis. You might recognize the word hydro, which means water. So with water, we can break off one of those phosphates from the adenosine, and that leaves us with now an adenosine molecule and two phosphates, so ADP. And you've got this free phosphate floating around it. In the process of splitting it, you release energy. So breaking this bond makes energy, and it's the energy that we use for life. In terms of stored ATP, stored cash, it's a little bit like the cash in your wallet compared to the cash in your bank. Assuming you've got more cash in your bank than in your wallet, and I guess that's not always the case. But we can only store a little bit of ATP in our bodies, just like you can only store a little bit of cash in your wallet. So it's just enough for a few seconds of intense exercise. So if you wanted to get up and get away very quickly, you have enough ATP to do that. The total weight of ATP that we use and regenerate each day is about 75% of your own body weight. So that's a cool little stat. If you take your body weight times it by 0.75, that number as a kilogram weight is how much ATP you have to remake in a day. And you're talking about something that is super small and super light. So in terms of how much you're regenerating, it's pretty unreal. So to store that, you'd have to almost double your weight. So it's much easier for the body just to make it as it goes. When we break these adenosine phosphate bonds, we have to then regenerate ATP quickly to supply energy for our daily needs. So that's what we do. We've got this adenosine with the two phosphates, and we've got this free phosphate floating around after it's been split. What we need to do is rebuild that compound to then be able to re-break it. So it's this constant build up, breakdown, build up, breakdown. In this process, the ADP and P reattach, so they regenerate ATP that's been broken apart. The regeneration of ATP from ADP and P requires us to add energy. So we actually need to add energy because remember we can't make it, so we need to give it some energy to rebuild to that broken bond. So it's like breaking apart and rebuilding Lego blocks. All life can be boiled down to the straightforward exchange of breaking and fixing chemical bonds. Or if we think back a couple of slides, we cannot make energy, but we can transform it and move it from one space to the other. Something else that comes from breaking this ATP molecule is heat. So splitting ATP generates heat. If you think about a time when you're cracking open lots of ATP, exercise, what happens to body temperature? It goes up because you're generating, as a byproduct, heat. So our body can replenish this ATP in a few different ways, and it depends on a few things. So how quickly are we asking our body for energy? So what's the demand for ATP at the moment? So you think sitting down right now, the demand for ATP isn't huge, so we can afford to do it slowly. How fast the reactions are happening, so how quickly, like what do we have available in terms of enzymes and catalysts to help speed up or slow down those reactions? What nutrients are available? So in our blood, what have we got floating around in terms of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins? What are our stores like? That's going to determine what we use to break. If you only eat fats, then you're going to burn more fat. If you only eat carbohydrates, then you're going to burn carbohydrates as a higher percentage. If you eat a bit of a balance of both, then there's going to be a bit of exchange between the two. The other one is whether there's enough oxygen to contribute to the reaction. So is there enough oxygen? Are we getting in enough oxygen? And the three main processes or energy systems, so talk about like pathways, processes, or systems all collectively and within this. The ATP PCR system, and you might remember this from anatomy, the glycolytic system, anaerobic glycolysis, so anaerobic meaning without oxygen, and then the oxidative phosphorylation system, so oxidative meaning with oxygen. What does this look like in real life? So we're going to actually watch a video of this in class. I've got a link to it on Moodle. It's called Energy Systems in Action. Check that out. So you burst into a maximal effort sprint. So you're going as hard as you can. you're racing your friend and you've got a lot of money on the race, so you're going as hard as you can, and you tap straight into your ATP stores that you have kicking around in your blood. But remember, it only lasts a few seconds. So then you need help from your ATP PCR system, which can regenerate ATP really, really quickly, and it gives you about 10 to 15 seconds worth of energy. So it's going to help you maintain that intense exercise or acceleration phase. As you keep running, the ATP PCR system can't keep up, so you run out of the products that you need to regenerate ATP in this way. So then your body goes, okay, we're going to have to start relying on our glycolytic pathway. So that's sort of like the next step. This slows down your exercise output because the amount of ATP and how quickly it's generated is a bit slower than your ATP PCR system. So a direct outcome of switching to different systems that have different speeds of regenerating ATP is your exercise output, or what it looks like. So this gives us about 90 seconds worth of work, depending on how trained you are in this space. Your glycolytic pathway can't keep up anymore either. So you've got all these byproducts of glycolysis building up that cause your body to have to slow down. And you need more ATP because you're still asking your body to exercise hard. So now we're going to have to switch into our oxidative phosphorylation system, which is super slow, but it's super efficient and can build a lot of ATP. But in terms of exercise intensity, it's a much slower, so you're going to have to slow down. If you think about this as a race, let's say 400 meters, that's what it looks like. Fast, getting faster, maintain, slow down, run out of juice. And in an Olympic event, the ones that win are the ones that can maintain or have the slowest reduction in acceleration towards the end. Often it looks like they're accelerating past everyone. In actual fact, everyone else is probably just slowing down quicker than them. So the ATP PCR system, we're going to look at these all individually. It's usually the first to kick in. If you ask your body to start cracking open a lot of ATP for some reason, it helps to make more ATP from ADP and phosphate. So it uses an enzyme called creatine kinase. So it's often an enzyme that helps to generate these reactions, and it breaks the bonds between what we call a creatine phosphate molecule. So we've got this thing called creatine and phosphate, one phosphate bound together, and creatine kinase splits those two. You split them, you've got creatine and one phosphate, and what we're looking for with ADP is another phosphate to come in. So this new ATP is generated from splitting creatine phosphate, and you might have heard of creatine as being a really good supplement for helping prolong endurance over a short amount of time. So what it's doing is providing the body with more of these PCR molecules to help regenerate ATP from ADP really, really quickly. But this new process of generating ATP only lasts about 10 seconds. There is about six times more phosphocreatine molecules in our muscles than ATP. It is naturally made in the body from different amino acids, but you can also get it from supplementation and from eating animal foods such as red meat and poultry. Next step is our glycolytic system. So it actually starts to kick off similar kind of time to your ATP PCR system, but it makes ATP much more slowly. In the cytosol of our cells, if you think about a cell, inside the cell there's like fluidy stuff, and then you've got these little organelles within. So floating around the organelles is fluid, so that's the cytosol, and within that space the glycolytic system breaks down stored carbohydrates, so it'll start to break down glycogen and available glucose. It can also use glycerol, which is broken down from triglycerides, to help regenerate ATP. So effectively, a glucose molecule can be split through glycolysis within the cytosol. It gives you about 90 seconds worth of intense exercise. As a byproduct, a substance called pyruvate, you might remember that from HAP, starts to build up, and that pyruvate, if left without enough oxygen, starts to ferment, and fermentation is a process of breakdown without oxygen. It's how we make alcohol, but in the body we don't produce alcohol, we produce lactate, and this lactate in your muscle cells decreases their ability to do the whole sliding filament model. So our sarcomere is contracting. It starts to break that down and affect how well that functions. So after about 90 seconds, or within sort of from 1 minute to 90 seconds, you'll really start to feel that burning feeling in the muscles that are working hard, heavy feeling, and your output will slow down or reduce. So if you're bench pressing for as many reps as you can, there will be a point where you cannot lift anymore. The movement speed will slow down. If you're running, output will start to slow down also. And that's because you're cracking open so many glucose molecules from glycolysis that these byproducts are building up and aren't able to be metabolized quick enough to get rid of them, and you create lactate. So at the same time, your oxidative system in the background is just slowly chipping away. But again, it's slowly, so your exercise intensity will need to decrease. You've exhausted ATP, PCR. Your glycolytic system has generated all of this lactate. So now we need to rely on our oxidative phosphorylation system to generate big chunks of ATP. Because we've also depleted, our glucose, our glycogen is starting to go down. So it shows up late. It's slow. This process happens in the mitochondria of a cell, so not in the cytosol, but in the mitochondria. And it goes through these two processes within that organelle called the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. And just think of these two things as like processing plants of different materials. So they can actually process that pyruvate that we're generating, that lactate we are generating, fats, different byproducts of other metabolism can be used in the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain to generate big numbers of ATP. So here's a bit of a summary. This graph or this table is asterisk this to know for the exam. You're going to be asked about this. So each pathway follows a unique, each macronutrient follows a unique path to help replenish ATP. Because we need a constant stream, we're always building up and breaking down compounds. So ATP PCR is super fast in terms of generating ATP, but it can only produce a small amount, and it's good for fast output or exercise. Glycolytic system is a quick regeneration of ATP. It's got a small capacity of regenerating ATP. For every one glucose molecule, you split it, you can make two, so it doesn't make a lot. And it's like medium intensity, medium speed. And then over on the far side, we've got the oxidative. The rate of ATP generation is really slow, uses lots of byproducts of glycolysis, different nutrients like fats with oxygen, but it can make lots. So ATP PCR, we can regenerate one at a time. Glycolytic, we're pretty much making two net. And then our oxidative system can, I think it's like up to 38 molecules of carbohydrates and over 100 molecules of ATP using fats as a fuel source. So we're going to look at the macronutrients individually. Carbohydrates as an energy source give us 4.1 calories per gram. They're the fastest acting macronutrient source for energy transfer, but we don't store a lot. About a day's worth of energy at best in our glycogen stores. So not a lot of storage really. So if you didn't eat all day, you've got almost enough energy stored in your your glycogen stores. Ingested carbohydrates are converted to a simple sugar called glucose, so it's a mono, meaning one, and then that's transported around the blood so that your cells can use that really, really quickly and easily. At rest, ingested carbohydrate is stored in the muscles and liver, which we know. This process is called glycogenesis. So the build-up of glucose into glycogen and stored is called glucogenesis. It's driven by a hormone called insulin, and it's in the form of a more complex sugar called a polysaccharide, poly meaning many, and it's called glycogen, as we know. Muscle and liver glycogen stores are limited, so we rely on dietary sources of carbohydrates to restore reserves. So we need to get carbs in regularly to maintain those stores. The liver can break down glycogen through a process called glycogenolysis, driven by a hormone called glucagon, so it's like the opposite of insulin. This is in our liver, and it helps us regenerate ATP or release glucose into the blood, ready to go. Especially important for tissues such as the brain and red blood cells, which cannot store their own glucose. The liver likes to share fuel. It's its job. Share fuel, metabolize different substances and dish it out where it needs to be. So the liver is super important. Muscles, on the other hand, don't like to share fuel. Glycogen stored in muscles is broken down and used by the muscles in that site. So glycogenolysis, or the breakdown of glycogen, and that's driven by epinephrine, which is one of our adrenal gland hormones, which is released during exercise. Glucagon and epinephrine activate the enzyme glycogen phosphorylase. Anything that says lase or ase means to split, so that tells you that it's some kind of enzyme that is breaking something. Glycogen, breaking glycogen. Sometimes we don't have enough glycogen available. Maybe we're in like famine, starving, haven't eaten any carbohydrates recently, or doing long endurance exercise, so we've burnt through our glycogen stores. And that's what hitting the wall looks like for an athlete. So check that out in Moodle. There's a video for that to see what that looks like. In this case, the liver, the blood glucose master commander, can make new glucose from a non-carbohydrate source. So this is called gluconeogenesis. Think of neo as sounding like new. So it's making new glucose from a non-carbohydrate source. And this can happen through pyruvate and lactate, which are byproducts of glycolysis. It also happens really slow. We can make it from proteins. We can also make it from glycerol, which is a part of fats. So we can make it from the byproducts of glycolysis, so through glucose. We can make it from protein, and we can make it from fats. Fatty acids and triglycerides have several key roles. They provide structure to our plasma membranes. Remember those phospholipids we talked about in HAP? And they make up a large portion of fatty tissue, such as like our eyes and our brain. They provide the raw materials for many hormones, help regulate functions of these hormones. Spelling mistake there. They also provide crucial nutrients such as essential fatty acids, omega-3s and 6, or as a carrier of fat-soluble vitamins. So vitamin D, E, K, and A use fat as a transporter to get into the body. It's also the largest fuel depot in the body, so our largest space for storing fuel. And that also helps, that stored version of energy also helps us regulate our body temperature. Triglycerides are made up of 3 fatty acids and 1 glycerol molecule. So I always use my hand as like a visual of that structure. So you got these 3 fatty acids bound to this glycerol. Stored in liver, adipose tissue, and muscle. So that's where our fats are stored. And triglycerides can be broken down by lipolysis. So lipids means fats, lysis means to split, and built back up into triglycerides. So triglycerides can be broken down by lipolysis and built back up through triglyceride synthesis. Synthesis means to build. So we're breaking them down, building them up all the time. Breaking down what we eat, using what we need, storing what we don't need. Before triglycerides can be used for metabolism, they first have to be broken down into something that's more basic, which is glycerol, this part, and the 3 fatty acids. So we need to make those into 3 fatty acids floating around within the body. So there's an enzyme called hormone-sensitive lipase, which helps drive that breakdown of fats. And these free fatty acids that we break down are able to move around our cells and be circulated by our blood. Hormone-sensitive lipase is activated by hormones such as epinephrine, norepinephrine, so those adrenal gland hormones, glucagon, so glucose is gone, so this hormone helps to break down fats into new carbohydrates, and growth hormone, which are all released during exercise. So that's why growth hormone can be used as abused as a supplement or a steroid to help increase lean body mass, because it helps drive the breakdown of fats. Just as the glucose molecules are packaged back up into the storage form of glycogen, fats can also be repackaged back into triglycerides. This mostly takes place in the liver. So our liver is pretty awesome. It does all the repackaging, but it can also take place directly in adipose tissue, especially when energy intake from food is super high, or energy output from metabolism and activity is low, or where there's a lot of insulin. So if we're overeating lots, then our body gets into this situation where it's actually able to synthesize triglycerides where our fat is stored. This process is governed by a complex of enzymes called fatty acid synthase system. Don't need to know that in detail, but again, it's enzymes which do a lot of this breaking down and building back up, driven by hormones. Fats contain a lot of potential energy compared to 36 ATP molecules average generated by 1 glucose. Breakdown of each triglyceride generates around 337. I think I said over 100, so it's actually over 300. So the potential ATP in fats is huge, and that's why you can get 9.4 calories per gram. So it's much more energy dense. When we're active, we generally need more energy faster than fat can provide. So as exercise intensity goes up, fats as a fuel source goes down during exercise at that time. I'll let you look at this in your own time. It just shows you how much, in terms of gram weight, we store some of this energy in carbs and fats, and then how many calories we get from it. And it shows you like how big fat stores are in terms of calories. Proteins. When we digest protein, we break it down first into peptides, which is 2 or more amino acids, and then we then break them down into individual amino acids. So amino acids is the name for the building blocks of proteins. After we absorb these amino acids, they pass through the liver. Again, the liver does all the processing of these macronutrients in terms of distribution. They then enter the bloodstream and become a part of this, what we call plasma pool. So plasma, remember, is that liquidy stuff in our blood of amino acids, almost like building materials in our blood as a pool of like, yep, we need those, we need that, we need this, we need that. So we need to constantly supply our system with protein so that we can keep those amino acid pools stocked. If we don't, then we're going to have to break down our own stores to help maintain life. Proteins are always broken down and rebuilt. This is called protein turnover. So you're breaking down proteins and building them up constantly. It's almost like when you are renovating your house, break it down, build it up, and this constant cycle of breakdown, build up, and you need a constant supply of different amino acids. The proteins we eat, digest, and deposit into the amino acid pool can then be used to produce important molecules such as things like enzymes, hormones, neurotransmitters, which help take the chemical message from one neuron to the next, antibodies in our immune system, transport protein, so vesicles that can help transport molecules in and out of cells, and structural protein, so the building of muscle tissue, for example. Our body normally prefers to use amino acids for these important metabolic functions. However, if our body needs energy, and we need energy to stay alive right now, and there's no other nutrients easily available, then we can break down protein to either help create other nutrients, such as glucose through gluconeogenesis, or to help regenerate ATP. So think about this, what is going to happen if we don't constantly supply the body with protein from our diet? Where's it going to get it from? Or if we don't provide our body with enough energy full stop over a long period of time. This just shows you the different pathways all 3 macronutrients take. So I'll let you have a look at this in the tutorial worksheet. You've got a chance to look at this in a bit more detail. Really quickly going to go through some basics of energy balance. Fundamental biochemical relationship between energy in and energy out is known as energy balance, and it's a pretty in vogue kind of concept at the moment with fat loss. It is simple, but it's also very technical, which doesn't make any sense, but it's simple, but it's not. So if we eat too many calories in compared to calories out, then you're going to gain weight. If you if your calories in don't match your calories out, then you're going to lose weight. Typically in nutrition, energy is measured as a calorie or a joule. Calorie is a unit of heat measure, so I think it's like the amount of energy needed to increase 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. And a joule is like a measure against like moving mass. So it's the amount of energy it takes to move an object that weighs 1 Newton across 1 meter of distance. And that's a kilocalorie. 1 kilocalorie, which is the same as 1 calorie, and on your like nutrition labels, is the same as 4.8 kilojoules or joules, same thing. And here are the factors that influence energy in and energy out. So your appetite, so how hungry you feel, and that's all based on things like your energy levels, your age, your size, the types of food consumed, how well you absorb calories, physiological factors, so like self-esteem, sleep quality, image perception, that kind of stuff. So that affects eating. And then energy out is things like how much energy you burn at rest. So bigger people at rest will burn more energy than the next person. How much exercise you do, how active you are. How much energy it costs to keep you moving outside of exercise. So even just like to sit and maintain posture, or people that fidget, burn more energy through non-exercise activity, and then energy burned through metabolizing food. Fiber and protein cost more to metabolize than carbohydrates and fats. So a diet high in protein and fiber costs more to sort that out. So it's going to influence energy out. In summary, and as I said, that was a real brief energy in, energy out kind of concept. It's much more technical than that, and things change a lot. I don't want to go too detailed into that. It's not a like a body mass or body composition shifting session. Summary: the sum of all chemical reactions in the body is known as metabolism. Most of these reactions turn food we eat into energy that we can use. We can't make energy, we can only transfer it to something else. ATP is cash money, energy currency. We need it for almost every action in the body. Using various energy pathways or systems, we can make ATP from all macronutrients. We store excess energy as body fat when our energy demands for metabolism and activity are low, and our energy intake from food is relatively high. This occurs regardless of what macronutrient combination we're eating. So you can overeat carbohydrates and repackage that as a fat. You can overeat fats and repackage that into triglycerides. Just like if you eat lots of fat, then you're going to increase fat metabolism. If you eat lots of carbohydrates, you're going to increase the use of carbohydrates. So it depends on the combination of the types of macronutrients, but you can use all of those. Dietary protein is more likely than any other macronutrient to be used for rebuilding tissues than energy. So it's like if we need it, we can use it. I know that was real fast, recorded lecture. Check out some of the supporting resources on Moodle. Next week we've got our practical lab session on energy systems and action. So there won't be a lecture, there will be practical activity, wearing a gas mask, looking at different energy systems across increasing exercise intensity. There'll be some questions related to that. Awesome.